How's it going? Welcome to another episode of the Rain Race podcast on a Thursday. Of course, we didn't get it out on Tuesday. We never are at this point. But I think I had a valid excuse this time. Just had highly unexpected things going on within the family, and wasn't physically home on Tuesday night. So updated that in the Discord. For the podcast notifications, you can join my Discord. The link will be on the YouTube channel banner with the links alongside my Twitter, and I don't know what else is up there, my photography page. If you want to join that for announcements on future episodes, we should also probably update that stuff on Twitter. Been slacking on that a little bit, but I'll probably be doing that for anything in the future, because this is certainly not going to be the last time that we end up postponing an episode, because it's becoming more frequent than it's not. Anyway, not here alone today. I'm joined alongside, of course, as always, by Kyle Cuthbertson.
What's going on, guys?
More enthusiastic than usual. Also have good buddy, good pal, good friend, Joe Donohue.
Hello, everybody.
Joe, you were here for the Indy 500. Oh no, there's a Indy 500 qualifying. I think the one we did for that. And it was just you for that one. There was no Kyle for that. And so yeah, good to have you back. We're going to be talking about Le Mans Hypercar today. We have officially confirmed another look at a hypercar for the 2022 season, evidently, which is the Peugeot 9X8. Need to keep correcting myself because I'm going to say 908 at some point in this episode. It's just force of habit after 2007 through 2011. But the 9X8 was unveiled just this past Tuesday, and I wasn't going to dedicate the priority of an episode towards it probably, but given how unique this car is and how much of a surprise it is, I think for everybody, I think it would be a sort of a joke if I wasn't to do that. Main thing to talk about with this car is the aerodynamics, and that is why I have invited Joe back, because when it comes to aerodynamics, I like to pretend like I know what I'm talking about, but I really don't, and I think Kyle fits in the same boat as me on that one. So yeah, I guess I'll just run down a couple of the details before we get into the aerodynamics. As I said, expecting a debut in the 2022 FIA World Endurance Championship. Now, I've seen some rumors going around saying that the car won't be ready for an entire season. Have to remember that the WEC was doing sort of split seasons where they would do 2019 into 2020, and then they would do 2020 into 21, 21 into 22, and 22 into 23. As a result of COVID, they ended up going back to the traditional standard 1 year on the calendar. So we have the 2021 season going on right now. And next season will be the 2022 season. So what that means is when this program was announced back, but I think it was actually the later part of 2019 or the early part of 2020. I actually think it was the latter part of 2019 though. It was stated that it would be on track for 2022. Now, of course, at that time, you're looking really 2022 into 23, so that's probably the second half of 2022 what they were referencing. Question right now is, are they going to be able to get on track for the opening round of the 2022 World Endurance Championship, likely at Sebring? And from what I've heard over the past week or so, it looks like that might not be the case. Also up for question is, will they be racing at Le Mans in 2022, or will they have to enter the season after that point, sort of just run a couple races towards the end of the season and then use 2023 as their first full-time season. So that's something worth pointing out. I know pretty much everybody wants to see them at Le Mans next year, because they would be the third manufacturer to really put it up with Toyota and Glickenhaus at Le Mans this year, or at Le Mans next year, sorry, as Alpine, unless they get grandfathered for an additional year, won't be on the grid next year, which I don't see that happening. But we'll have to wait and see on that one. That's just sort of what I've been hearing over the past week or so. Technical details for the car itself: it is powered by a 2.6 liter twin turbocharged V6, petrol powered, notably, but worth pointing out because obviously their diesel powered 908 that went up against the Audi R10 was very famous for being diesel powered. So petrol power in this one. This engine was actually announced quite a few months ago. I'm trying to remember exactly what time frame it was announced in, but it might have been the later stages of last year or the beginning of 2021. Can't really remember, but that isn't new news. Estimated at around 680 horsepower for the internal combustion engine, driven to the ground by a 7-speed transmission. And on the front drivetrain, you have a 200 kilowatt electric motor. That is the hybrid element of the car. That hybrid is powered by a 900 volt battery, which was developed in partnership by Peugeot Sport and Total/Saft. Yeah, I think that's the majority of the major technical details to go over here. So, aerodynamics. Most notable part of this car by far. This is what you're going to see on the headlines. That's what you're seeing on the headline of this YouTube video, both in the thumbnail and in the title, is that there is no definitive rear wing on this car. And what I mean by that is the rear end is slightly sloped to sort of give off the impression that, yeah, you know, this isn't like they're completely ignoring rear downforce entirely, but there is no separate rear spoiler, rear wing, at all on this car. It's merely a sloped rear end of the car that follows the contours of the regular bodywork. That would be the first car to race at Le Mans without a rear wing since 2014 with the Nissan Ziad RC. And looking at a car that's fighting for the overall win without a rear wing, you'd have to look back probably to the 1970s, I'd have to guess, to find something along those lines. But this is where I want to call in Joe. Joe, been an engineering student for 4 years now. And I know that aerodynamics isn't really your focus within engineering, but figured I'd get your opinions on this anyways, because there's a lot to talk about with the rear end of this car. And is it going to generate enough downforce at a track like Le Mans? And if so, how?
So that's, obviously a mechanical engineer, you wouldn't initially say, oh, he knows everything he knows about aerodynamics, but I've gotten around a little bit, and I can tell you so obviously you got to look at what the rules are first off. When they're designing this car, evidently Peugeot's trying to build a car that'll win the race, but they have to stay within the limitations of what sorts of power output they can have, the downforce and drag that they're going to be able to create to still stay within a performance window that'll give them an opportunity to race with Toyota, maybe Glickenhaus too. I'd love to see Glickenhaus up there, but obviously I think it's easily agreeable that Toyota's kind of the big one coming in terms of who's going to kind of be the Goliath in that situation when everybody starts showing up together. But if you want to look at the rear of the car, I think there's a lot more presence of rear wings sort of as an extra piece to abide the way that we've built the cars more recently. But what Peugeot's doing is very novel, very futuristic, and over time we have to try to progress our technology. So I'm excited to see it. If you look at the rear end of that car, it doesn't have a rear wing, but I've just been calling it a spoiler rather than anything else, because more or less the rear end of the car does imitate sort of an aggressive wing-esque shape on top. And if you also look at it from the rear, you can see how the diffuser and the top of the car sort of, it doesn't come to a perfect point, but they mesh back into the same form. And so what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to take the air that's coming out of the diffuser underneath and the air that's going over the top of the car, and to their best of their ability, they're going to try to mesh the two flowing streams of air back together in a laminar pattern, which just means straight air, which would obviously create less turbulence, hopefully avoid turbulence completely, and less drag. Any air that you can replace behind a car, if you imagine a car driving at a fast pace of speed, any air that you can replace into sort of a position that it was in before the car hit it is going to eliminate drag and eliminate turbulent air, which is going to increase the efficiency of the car. I do think that this is a good idea. I'm very excited to see how it works because when you have a separate wing element, you're adding frontal surface area first off. You're also adding surface drag from the actual wing itself. So I think this is a really great opportunity for Peugeot to implement a new way of reducing drag on that wing that hopefully will give it a higher top speed, make it a little bit more efficient with the limited amount of energy they're allowed to use every lap at Le Mans. And so I wouldn't count them out just by the aerodynamic standpoint. A lot of people are kind of looking at that and wondering how that's even going to work. But I think that this is going to eliminate a large punch in the air for the frontal aggression of the car, the frontal surface area of the car, and hopefully it'll give them a chance to kind of work on some of that aerodynamic efficiency that'll get them faster on the straightaways, because that really seems to be something that this car is looking at when you're not adding those extra elements that are going to be making the car have more downforce in the corners. So that might be more their approach with this setup. But you do also have to keep in mind that they haven't at least yet shown what active aero they're going to be implementing. The teams are going to be allowed to have one active aero piece on the car in any way, shape, or form that they want. A lot of people have been saying they're probably going to add a front wing that does that, but it's not impossible to think that they might add some sort of active aero rear wing over the top of that. That's something I don't think anybody's really mentioned yet. But overall, yeah, I'm excited to see how efficient it really is at replacing that air as the car moves along on the racetrack. And I think that's kind of what their goal is: eliminate drag behind the car.
Right, and something I've mentioned in previous episodes is over the past years, I think, let's just jump back to 2015, there were sort of 3 aero kits that you had to play around with. The LMP1 teams, at least. They would have the high downforce cars. I'm just going to use Audi as an example here because it's the one that I'm the most familiar with. But in 2015, Audi had their sort of high downforce package, which they ran at, I believe it was the season opener at Silverstone, and then Spa they ran the high downforce on one of the cars, or two. There were 3 cars at Spa. One of them they ran high downforce. I believe the other 2 were low downforce, or the other way around. And then Le Mans they went to the high downforce, or the low downforce aero kit, obviously, and then realized that low downforce kit was actually more efficient, so they switched to an aero kit that was based off that for the rest of the season. Sort of a hybrid in between that low downforce and high downforce aero kit. Anyway, where I'm going with this is for this season, I guess let's jump before the season real quick. They allowed 2 aero kits, so it was down from 3 to 2, and then this season with the Le Mans Hypercars, you're only allowed 1. So where I'm going with that is, main point being, you have right here, to me, this is a pretty aggressive stance at let's make a car have as little drag as possible, which that aligns with the philosophy of Le Mans. You have the longest straightaways, some of the longest straightaways in racing. There have been many manufacturers over the years who have tried to make a car as slippery as possible to try to make it dominant at Le Mans. In fact, if you want to talk about Peugeot, if you look back in the 1980s, they had their Project 400 car, which the sole purpose of that car was to go 400 kilometers per hour down the Mulsanne Straight, and then it blew up. But it was very slippery, and it was very quick in a straight line. And I sort of see the same philosophy with this car. It's very interesting for sure, because you have to find a balance of how much do I want to win Le Mans versus how much do I want to be a heavy contender at the rest of the races. I'm really curious to see what they're able to achieve with underbody downforce. There's going to have to be a huge presence of it, just solely on the fact that they're missing an entire rear wing that both Glickenhaus and Toyota have right now. So they're going to have to compensate for that somewhere. But they have been sort of secretive, but definitely hinting that they have some tricks up their sleeve. And like you said, I'm very excited to see what that's all going to look like when we get to see the car on track. Got a couple of comments here that I want to get to, because I can also tie in Kyle's opinion on this as well. But finally, here live, with how these hypercars are coming out, how road-going hypercars look, what's your opinion on modifying the already existing track hypercars for the World Endurance Championship? So I was thinking about this the other day, right after this car was revealed. And the main thing I've seen the general public saying about this car when it came out is, wow, this car looks really cool. This is what we wanted. This is sort of that Vision Gran Turismo concept car esque design that everybody was expecting Le Mans Hypercar to be. So, you know, the general reception I've seen of this car in comparison to when the Toyota was revealed was much higher. I think this is what the majority of people wanted to see these cars look like. And so I got to ask Kyle as well. I think from a fan perspective, when you have these new regulations, this is a huge opportunity, especially when you're sort of focused on cars that look like road-going cars. You have a huge opportunity to draw in a multitude of new fans, just based on how these cars look and how exciting they look. I think the analogy that's always made is you have the bedroom wall pin-up poster held up with a little bit of Scotch tape on the wall, and you know what those cars were for kids in the 80s and the 90s. You look at cars like the Mazda 787 was a big one in that category. And I think that this car sort of fits the textbook definition of that perfectly, where this is a car that a lot of kids are going to look at when they start watching endurance racing and say, wow, I mean, that's a standout car. And I think that it's, you know, this car alone, I think, has a lot of potential to pull in quite a few fans, at least based on the philosophy that everybody sort of likes the way the design of this car is headed. So Kyle, I kind of want to get your opinion on that as well, because I noticed on Twitter you had just made a brief comment about this car and its design.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely stunning, and you're right. The whole, you know, going to hypercar and having these cool futuristic looking cars, you know, was the idea. And when the Toyota came out, the Glickenhaus came out, I think a lot of people felt like they fell kind of short, honestly. But the Peugeot, man, I think through the last couple of years, you look at the car industry and you go to, you know, the big car shows like the Cleveland Auto Show, you know, the Detroit Auto Show, you know, all that, and all these manufacturers put out those, you know, neat looking concept cars that are all futuristic, and you know, they're just showing off all this technology that, you know, likely doesn't even exist. But you know that those cars just are never going to be on the road, or at least in the near future. And then a car like the Peugeot, the first thought I had was, man, this looks like something a manufacturer would draw up just to put out for a publicity stunt. But to think of this thing's actually racing, and it's racing at places like Sebring that we'll actually get to go watch, man, that is so, it makes me so excited, and you know, genuinely just really feeling positive about the future of sports car racing. It really feels like we're going back to a time that for a short stint felt like we were never going to be able to get back to. So yeah, this car is stunning, and it's exactly what sports car racing needs.
Taurus has returned to the chat, frequent to this podcast. Appreciate you being here again. Said it may be a weird comparison, but when I first saw the Peugeot, one of my first thoughts was the Gurney Eagle GTP. I think it's the through body air tunnels. You're dead on with that. I saw actually a couple comparisons.
Yeah, we're on the same page there.
To that car. Not just that, but you can also look back at the Nissan GTR LM Nismo from 2015. As much of a failure as that car was, the aerodynamics on it were certainly, I think, the most radical at the time, or at least showed the most potential at Le Mans. I still have a video that I want to put out at some point, what that car really could have been had it had a functioning hybrid system, because, you know, Ben Bowlby in charge of the aerodynamics on that car. Certainly, he's had a lot of concepts in the past that people said wouldn't work, and then they did. You can just take the Delta Wing as an example of that. But anyway, that's a topic for another day. But yeah, I have seen multiple people making that comparison. And yeah, certainly doesn't hide the fact that they're prioritizing underbody downforce. I'd love to see exactly what that car is capable of at Le Mans. I had something. Okay, so to answer the question from before though, what's your opinion on modifying the already existing track hypercars for the World Endurance Championship? I don't. Well, okay, so for starters, it's not. I don't think, because Toyota and Glickenhaus are kind of stuck. Their cars are already homologated into the current rules cycle, so it's not like they're going to be going out and changing their designs radically in response to this car. But we've also sort of seen just different philosophies. I think Toyota really went with that tried and tested conservative approach, you know, and I don't think that they're wrong for doing that. They've won Le Mans the past 3 years now. They obviously have a wealth of R&D that they were able to gather from the TS050 program. And when it came to this car, they decided, all right, well, let's make a car that we know, we'll know the limits of this car and we know how to work with it. I think that's the approach that they went down. And so far, I mean, we're only 2 races in, but it's working well for them so far. Glickenhaus did go a little bit more aggressive because they're a completely new team. And the main thing I've pointed out in the past is how much flexibility you have with the Le Mans Hypercar category. In terms of what you're able to do with the design of the cars, they don't really restrict you, at least for modern day racing terms, they don't restrict you anywhere near as much as, say DPI or LMDH likely will. And I've said in the past that it's sort of unfair to just assume that all of these cars should look like the crazy Vision GT concept cars we've seen in the past, because the main purpose is we're not going to tell you what you can and can't do to your cars. Go do what you want to do to make the car as quick and efficient as you think you can make it. And I've said in the past that the reason why we're seeing cars that look like LMP1 cars is because they were developed for 20-something years, at least in that sort of, the design cues that you had on LMP1 cars were getting more and more similar over the past probably 20 years as we got towards the end of the class. And I think that was a working formula, and it was probably some of the most efficient 2-seater closed fender cars you could make, and or not closed fender, but closed wheeled cars you could make, and that's why the Toyota and the Glickenhaus sort of did go down that conservative path. Now I'm interested to see what Ferrari pulls, because Ferrari will be naturally up next to reveal their car. I think Ferrari, when you look at cars they've done in the past, they're generally more conservative, but I would love to see them do something crazy like this as well, because as I said, it really, you're going to draw more eyes with this car than you're going to draw with a Toyota and even the Glickenhaus. I think this car itself is going to be what ends up on the walls of kids' bedrooms on the poster, as I said. And I'm certainly welcoming of it and can't wait to see it on track, as I said. Jonathan Ledoux asked, what manufacturer would be your dream entry for hypercar, hypothetically? Honestly, I said it for a while, but I wanted to see Ferrari in the hypercar category, and so I'm super happy that we get to see them in there, because Ferrari, when you look at Formula One, they have a huge fan base, and I think it's going to be great if they can even carry 5% of their Scuderia Ferrari fans over to full-time endurance racing fans. That's going to be a big impact. Now, Ferrari's already in the championship, or they're already committed, so I'm going to say Mercedes, because Mercedes with their Project One was a car that I was certainly hoping would be in endurance racing. I mean, that car used the 2016 Mercedes Formula One car's engine and hybrid system, I believe. And they've had a couple of issues getting that road car up and off the ground, but I certainly would have loved to see that car at Le Mans. And Mercedes returned to Le Mans. They haven't had a great history at that race, and I was hoping that they would try to finally put that all behind and try to win up against all of these manufacturers, including Ferrari. If you could have a championship, the World Endurance Championship, if it could sort of mirror what we're seeing in Formula One with battles between Mercedes and Ferrari, I think that alone could bring in millions of fans to each race that they run. Um, and yeah, I don't know if there's too much else to go over about this car. I am planning on making a YouTube video about the car itself, going over some of the other, just make it down into a more concise formula or a more concise format to go over that car, because I think it's worthy of it. Just trying to think of when I'm going to have enough time to go over or to actually make a video on that, because I'm a little restricted on time this week. Anyway, keep you updated with that on the community tab. A couple of other things that were announced for sports car racing today. We'll start off with LMP2, the next generation of LMP2 regulations that we've talked about a little bit in the past have been delayed an additional year to 2024. They were originally slated to be introduced at the beginning of 2023 as the same time as the LMDH formula. And that was all announced at the 2020 Rolex 24. Well, it just came out earlier today that they will be delaying that car's introduction. So the current formula that we have in P2 will be going for its 7th year in 2023. And the other piece of news I have to go over here, I mean, there's not a ton to talk about with it, but it is certainly a milestone agreement, is that the FIA has approved the regulations amendment for Le Mans Hypercar and LMDH convergence. And that basically is just sort of the next step into having proper convergence between these classes. I've said it before, I'll say it again. If they screw up convergence, it's going to be the worst mistake sports car racing has made in decades, if not maybe its entire history, because this is the one shot, I think, with all the manufacturers that we have lined up on both sides. I think the only real shame is that we have a 50-50 split right now in interest. I guess, you could consider that a positive if you wanted to. But right now we have one side with LMDH. You have BMW, Audi, Porsche, Honda. Looks like we're going to be getting Cadillac. I've said that a couple of episodes now. But still no formal announcement from Cadillac. And a couple of others potentially in that class as well. And Le Mans Hypercar, we have Toyota, Glickenhaus, Peugeot, and Ferrari at the moment, with the potential again of a couple more down the road. So convergence for that, certainly extremely important, and I'm still really curious to see how they're going to balance those two formulas together, and if they're going to incorporate them all into one class, or if they're going to do sort of, say, at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, they're going to have a Le Mans Hypercar class and an LMDH class. I'm not going to go too far into that because it's all pure speculation at the time. And I guess the last thing to go over with that is there is still discussion on whether or not the Le Mans Hypercar formula will be present in IMSA. At the moment, right now, it is just the World Endurance Championship that will have both Le Mans Hypercar and LMDH. So I guess, glass half empty, glass half full, if you think that's good or bad news that it hasn't been confirmed yet. But hey, at least they're still talking about it potentially happening, which I think a lot of people have already dismissed the potential of seeing these cars like the 9X8 in IMSA. So I think a lot of people certainly want to see that car on track in the States outside of Sebring, and it would be great to have the opportunity for it to at least happen should they want to. Anyway, once again, I've been talking quite a bit, so I'm going to toss it back to Kyle here. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time recapping races this week because it is Thursday. It feels like it's a little bit too late to do a proper dive into each race that went on over the weekend, but I do want to quickly recap what happened over the weekend with each race and give an update on how it affected the championships and their respective series. So Kyle, obviously IndyCar, Mid-Ohio, you were there, and it was actually the most watched non-Indy 500 race in NBC's history, and the most watched IndyCar race at Mid-Ohio since 2008 at 1.3 million viewers. So in front of a large audience, both at the track and on TV, why don't you give us a rundown on the IndyCar weekend at Mid-Ohio?
Yeah, good TV rating, which I was actually pleasantly surprised about, honestly. But I mean, being on network NBC on July 4th, I mean, I guess I shouldn't have been that surprised, but honestly, for the most watched IndyCar race, it might have fell short a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. So going into Mid Ohio, the race, the distance of the race is obviously it's the Honda Indy 200, and it was 90 laps, which I don't know. That still didn't equate to 200 miles, but still, they went from 90 laps to 80 laps this year, and they did that to change up the strategy and to change up the dynamic of the race. And in my opinion, that kind of ruined the race because Mid Ohio, a track where you know, if you've watched IMSA there, if you've watched really any race from Mid Ohio, you know that passing doesn't really come at a premium. So the way to, you know, the way to combat that is with strategy, to make it an entertaining race on, you know, who's the best in the pits, who can save the fuel the best, you know, this and that. And in an IndyCar, 90 laps is very tricky around Mid Ohio to complete with only making 2 stops. It's very easy in 3 stops. So it used to be entertaining. And this year, it was pretty much an easy 2-stop race. And it came down to Joseph Newgarden and Marcus Ericsson racing for the win. And I'll tell you what, with 10 more laps, it would have been a lot more entertaining. But yeah, Joseph Newgarden got his first win of the season. The only thing else really about the race itself that is important is that Colton Herta had a very terrible, tragic day. Was probably the fastest car on track, but had a fuel rig issue, which is just obviously he's got Brian Herta on the box, so that's prone to happen at least one race a year. So that happened. Scott Dixon wrecked Will Power on like lap 4. That was fun. There was a spin on lap 1 in the first corner with 2 of the Andretti drivers. Funny enough, 2 of the Andretti drivers that don't have a contract for next year. And Romain Grosjean had another fantastic race. Had a poor qualifying. Qualified like 18th, I think, something like that, or 20th. And ended up finishing, I believe, 7th. At the end of the day, he was really the only guy. Like I said, passing in Mid Ohio is not easy. Romain Grosjean just looked like a beast. Pato O'Ward as well, qualified 18th. Yeah, I believe Grosjean qualified 20th, and O'Ward was 18th. So he also came through the field and ended up salvaging a top 10. But at the end of the day, Alex Palou, the current championship leader, finished in the 3rd spot behind his teammate. And yeah, that just pretty much solidifies Alex Palou is pretty consistent, and he's probably going to win the championship. I'm putting that out there right now. Anything else? Yes, Taurus just said in the chat, Rahal Letterman Lanigan had a good day. Graham Rahal, for once, I've been talking about him a lot this year because he's just been criminally underrated, and he's been qualifying in the back every race, and every race he finishes within the top 5 of the top 10. It is just his stats in finishing the top 10 are crazy, and his stats in qualifying of not even making the second round is crazy. But Takuma Sato actually qualified in the back and finished 10th, and Graham Rahal for once this season qualified 8th and finished 6th. So good day for them for once. Yeah, that's as far as the championship goes. Alex Palou, still your leader. Joseph Newgarden, first Team Penske win of the season. First win for Joseph Newgarden for the season. Very surprising, but that's just the way this season's been. He is still. I'm going to confirm that. I'm just going to say it. I believe he's 69 points back.
Nice.
You really waited there for us, didn't you?
I did.
I could tell. I wasn't even going to give it. I wasn't even going to give that to you.
Chris,
my mouth was shut.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome. I wasn't gonna pass that opportunity up.
Yeah. Okay. But anyways, yeah, he's still pretty far back. Scott Dixon is in 3rd, and Pato O'Ward is in second, but obviously Alex Palou finishing in the third spot, ahead of Dixon, ahead of O'Ward. Just maximized his day and moved himself further up in the point standings. And what I'm going to end on here is what I ended on last week's show, talking about the IndyCar Championship. Is we're past Mid Ohio now, and the tracks on the rest of the season: Nashville, IMS Road Course, Gateway, Portland, Laguna Seca, and Long Beach. And only two of those tracks, being the IMS Road Course and Gateway, have Alex Palou competed on before. Nobody's been to Nashville, and then obviously Portland, Laguna, and Long Beach are three tracks that the points leader Alex Palou has never raced at. And I don't think O'Ward has raced at Portland or Laguna Seca. He has raced at Long Beach though, so the championship battle should get very interesting. But then again, Alex Palou never raced at Barber either, and he won there in his first try. So I mean, it's just getting to the point to where Alex Palou is just so consistent that it's going to be really hard to beat him. But I mean, yeah, that's. If you guys have any other thoughts on the IndyCar Championship?
Well, I was going to ask Joe about this because I've already talked to you, Kyle, on if we're going to see, again, for intents and purposes, I'm going to call them rookies. You know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about Palou and O'Ward versus the veterans of Dixon and Newgarden. I think if you want to look at the four, why not look at the top four in the championship right now? I've talked to you already about this, Kyle, but I do want to get Joe's opinion on it. I would always feel like as we get into the later stages of a season, and this applies to any series, not just IndyCar, but I always feel like in the latter parts of a season, that's where you see the veterans really hold out with consistency, and that's where they can claw back some points and maybe pull the championship away from one of the, again, rookie drivers in quotes. Joe, I want to hear your opinions on that because we are getting into the closing stages of this season. As Kyle said, Alex Palou holds a nearly 40-point lead over O'Ward, and then it's an additional, let's see, quick maths, 17? Yes, 17 points back to Scott Dixon, who's 56 behind his teammate Alex Palou. So I just kind of want to hear your opinions on who you think is going to be coming out on top, because you got to remember, next race we have, which by the way is 30 days away, in Nashville is a track. That's a track that nobody in IndyCar has ever set a lap on before. It hasn't existed before this year. So I think that's a track that's going to be sort of a critical race in the championship hunt. But then you go into some more familiar tracks like Indianapolis Road Course, Gateway, Portland, Laguna Seca, and Long Beach that, you know, maybe could fall into the hands of these drivers who have years of experience racing there. So Joe, not going to keep talking here. I'm going to let you give some thoughts on that because I've already given mine and Kyle's already given his.
Yeah, when you look back, I mean, you can look across most any motorsports series, like, you know, Formula One, IMSA, IndyCar in the past, and if you look back, you'll see a lot of the times the champion is not the guy who wins at the beginning of the season. It's the guy who is consistent in the middle of the season and rounds out well. Scott Dixon was well known for doing that and won a couple of his championships that way, sort of in the 2010s, earlier 2010s. You know, obviously not last year, but last year was completely different. I think it's fair to say that we did see a little bit of that from some of the other guys. I think Renus, and you know, Renus is like my favorite driver in the series, but Renus kind of had that, and I know obviously he didn't start Road America at all, and he even got a podium, got second place in the first race at Detroit. But I agree. Usually you see Scott Dixon, Joseph Newgarden get consistent in the middle of the season, and Joseph's been doing what he's got to do. I mean, he's got, 3 poles in a row, and those are bonus points. And then Scott Dixon is just consistently the kind of guy who wins races in the middle of the season. And one of those places, though, that he's always good is Mid-Ohio. And he got outshone and, you know, outdone by his teammate Alex Palou. And, you know, Joseph Newgarden won the race. Marcus Ericsson's been getting better lately, too. I think I'd love to see a changing of the guard to be fair to new talent. Because you look at Scott Dixon. I mean, Scott Dixon's been racing in IndyCar almost as long as some of the new guys have been alive. And it's great for him because he's a well accomplished race car driver. I got a ton of respect for him on the track. But it's always nice to get some new people winning races. And this year we saw Alex Palou win his first race. We saw Pato O'Ward win his first race. Marcus Ericsson. Renus won his first race too. That's the type of stuff that really gets people excited. And I think that's something that IndyCar kind of needed. I know Joseph's not been around a long time, but he's definitely had a big presence the last 6-7 years as a driver to watch every weekend. So it's nice to just get some new talent to the front end, and maybe Pato and Alex will fall off a little bit if what you're saying is going to happen, which could not. You never know. Motorsports is motorsports, but I think that Palou specifically is showing bizarre consistency, just crazy good consistency right now. And it is the middle of the season, like you said. So I think Palou is in a spot to be that guy, to be one of those consistent drivers in the middle of the season that gives himself a chance at the end to be the champion, which is great news because, I think I've personally thought as of late, the changing of the guard does not happen much in IndyCar. We've seen a lot of talent come in that lasts only a few years and then fades out because you still got Will Power, Scott Dixon, for not too long ago. I mean, this year obviously hasn't been as strong for him, but Simon Pagenaud, it's just the same guys, and they're great guys. Don't get me wrong; they're great race car drivers, and they deserve the chance. But after a while, you want to start seeing some new people come to the front, and that's what's happened. So I'm glad that that's happened for the sake of the excitement side and for getting some new people up to the top end of the podiums and into victory lane. You look back at, say, I think of F1 Vettel versus Hamilton 2018. That championship was won in the middle of the season because that was the point in time where Ferrari and Sebastian Vettel they had small mistakes and they couldn't just keep up, and Lewis got enough points to evidently win that championship. And so I know Palou has a solid gap. It's a pretty nice gap, but you can't rely on that for very long. So what he's showing right now with, 3 podiums in a row is that he can keep that moving forward. And I really like that. I'm excited by that. It's much more exciting than just seeing the same drivers win every week. I think that's the really big draw of it, is the new excitement, the new people, the new drivers to root for, the new merchandise to buy that's going to, drive some more popularity into the series itself. It does help to have your race on, NBC, to have it on the big channels. But if you want to bring more people in, you want to get people excited again about something they've been used to for a long period of time, that's the type of stuff you need. So it's great to see. I'm excited. And, it's good to catch a break for some of these guys, because I've thought in the past too, guys like Elio, TK, Scott Dixon, while they do well, they hold a seat with a really good team. And obviously that seat doesn't get offered to new talent. It did with Joseph Newgarden a few years back, which was really awesome to see. And you saw how well he used it to his ability, championship winning driver. But there's been other talents that have come through. And when I think about somebody who deserved more time to show his talent and prove himself, I think of Oliver Askew straight away. That just, if the turnaround was a little quicker, somebody like Askew probably would have had a chance to be a race winner. So, Palou could have been that guy too, but he's not. He got the chance, he got in that spot, and he's been getting wins and podiums. So that's the kind of thing I think you need in motorsports, as tough as it is to say. You want your favorite driver to race forever, but we're humans. That's not possible. And it's really great to see some new people move up through. There's so many great drivers all over the world that deserve a chance to race at a high level, and being able to offer those seats to the guys is showing, especially this season with Alex and Pato being 1 and 2 in the championship, that that is a worthwhile investment, and that is an important part of the sport.
Yeah, and we've seen that a lot, you know, in the last few years. I think I've said this to you, Joe, and it's crazy to think about. And I think this will happen in 20 years from now. We're going to be talking to our kids about, you know, back in our day when we were young, we got to see Colton Herta, Alex Palou, Pato O'Ward, Rinus VeeKay, all these great drivers that are coming up right now and finally showing what they're made of. We're going to be talking about how we saw their early years, you know,
Yeah,
when they're all champions, when they're all, you know, have racked up all these wins. And
yeah,
it's just, I think for years now we've talked about, you know, the next generation of IndyCar drivers who made their way up through the road to Indy, because the road to Indy for a lot of years has had tons and tons of great talent that has finally made its way to IndyCar. Joseph Newgarden, for one, I remember, you know, anyone who remembers when he was racing for Sarah Fisher, and I don't think everybody quite, you know, understood how good of a talent we had back then. But look at him now, and it's great to see, you know, Colton Herta, who came onto the scene, and he's established himself in his rookie season in 2019. Won last year at Mid Ohio, won this year. Pato O'Ward, finally, after his stuff that happened in 2019, in the part-time rides and all that, finally in year number 2 with McLaren, is a 2-time race winner, second in the points, has been talked about as the championship favorite all year long. And Rinus VeeKay, who came up through the road to Indy, raced in Indy Lights, and now is an IndyCar race winner. And I don't think a lot of people expected that either. Going into last year, I don't think a lot of people expected this out of Rinus, how good he was last year as well. And it's good to see these guys finally becoming, I think the right word for it is established, and proving that they can take the fight to the veterans. And I will say, you did mention merchandise. When I was at Mid Ohio, when I was at Road America, I think every race this year I've been to, and last year too, a lot of Colton Herta jerseys, a lot of Pato O'Ward jerseys. I believe I've even seen some VeeKay stuff. I mean, it's great to see the fans embracing these young drivers as well, and not just, you know, because what you also have to do is you have to open up these drivers, you know, to the fans, and, you know, because the fans generally, if you're a casual, you might know Scott Dixon, you might know Will Power. Those might be the two, you know. Joseph Newgarden, maybe. But we really need to market these guys because they're, like you said, like we keep repeating, they are finally establishing themselves, and they are proving to be actually the future of IndyCar, and not just talked about being the future.
yeah, and that's what IndyCar needed. I mean, you mentioned us getting to see these great drivers rise through the ranks, rise into IndyCar. I mean, my parents got to see Scott Dixon win a race at Nazareth when he was just coming up through Indy Lights into the world of Indy cars, high level Indy cars. And I mean, Nazareth's been gone almost coming towards 20 years. And when they saw him win, it was 1996, I believe, some either 95, 96, 97, something like that. So while, you know, and same goes for like TK and Elio and, you know, some of those other guys started in other places like Simon Pagenaud hasn't been racing in IndyCar as long, but he raced in Europe. He raced at Le Mans for a while too. That the guys like that have just been there so long. And yeah, everybody knows Scott Dixon. Everybody's going to know TK. But like you said, Kyle, maybe 20 years from now, 15, 20 years from now, will be those old kooks sitting in the grandstands talking about remembering when Alex Palou started racing in, you know, 2020. And that's part of the evolution of a series too. Even on top of the technology and the cars is the drivers, and then the merchandise, like you said. I mean, they got to sell merchandise, right? That's a big part of the economy of motorsports, and we can't just people will buy merchandise. Don't get me wrong, but if I look at some of my friends, I'll use Brian, my friend Brian, as an example. Huge Simon Pagino fan. Simon's been sponsored by a lot of companies, but there's only so much you can buy, right? And I know Brian's wore the same shirt to the Indy 500 more than once, if not more than twice, with supporting his driver. So while evidently, people work, people make money, and you need to be smart with your money, but you're only on the planet so long. You need to spend your money on something fun to keep yourself, having fun. And so for Brian, maybe the new merchandise every year for Simon Pagino more or less is the same, and he doesn't buy it. But if you have new drivers, you have new opportunities for somebody like him to go, hey, I actually really like Rinus VK. I'm going to go buy that car, that diecast, go buy that shirt. That's something worthwhile that in a completely different regard that maybe we don't think about or focus on. It's still important. And then it just, people will always pick a driver, right? People will always just pick a driver or two that they think kind of mimics maybe who they are or they can relate to in some way. And that's a big part of racing. Anybody in the grandstand could pick somebody out on the racetrack that's their favorite. So it'll evolve with the sport, and I think that's another really important part of the social side of racing, and for IndyCar too, to have these new people that somebody who went to the 500 and saw AJ Foyt win a race now can say, hey, the way that Rinus VK kid drives suits the styles of people I used to see race when I was younger, or something of that sort, just as an example. And it'll keep the sport moving forward, because elsewise you just would get to the point where you'd have a bunch of 40 and 50-year-olds driving the cars.
IRL late 90s. We just bring in all the USAC guys because we don't have any young stars.
Well, there were some cool guys in that mix too.
Oh, they were cool, but were they? It's not like what we have now, where we.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
The difference is now guys like Colton Herta, Petto Award, Alex Pillow. These are Rinus VK. These are all guys that we can see, realistically, potentially being, the driving force to move the sport forward, rather than just, like I said, late 90s IRL, where we just have a bunch of guys, older guys from USAC, and we just have a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. And
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add that there's sort of that, there's somewhere in our minds, there's sort of a contrarian mentality that in time, if you grow up, I've seen this plenty of times, and this applies to all sports, but you've got a dad and a kid, and the dad likes a driver, let's say Elio, as an example. He likes Elio. The kid grows up, being immersed in the Elio idea, but there comes a point where the kid wants sort of their own identity in who they like, who they root for, and then they'll pick somebody new. Like maybe in 2013, 14, a kid in that spot in life would say, hey, this Joseph Newgarden kid is really cool and really good. And, now you've come down the road and that kid's a big Newgarden fan now because of, there's just the point in time where new people, new fans are going to want new drivers to root for. Somebody like in that situation that is used to everybody liking Elio or Scott Dixon or TK, drivers who stick around a long time, they're going to want someone new, someone fresh, someone different to like. So that's a big part of bringing, some younger interest into it, is kind of that mentality. And the same goes for teams, sponsors, all that jazz. That's a really valuable thing that I think is something IndyCar is benefiting from this year. And I think this year IndyCar has been able to grow, maybe not completely, but at least in part from what happened in that regard, that you're bringing in new people and they're rising to stardom and they're winning races and they're selling shirts and they're saying things on interviews that people like to hear.
All right, and moving on, Chris.
That's what you're gonna do? You're gonna end the 30-minute discussion with moving on?
I've got two more things to talk about, but I was just gonna say, Chris, if we're moving on if we're talking about IndyCar too long.
Okay. Well,
Sorry.
all right. Yeah, go ahead. You toss it right over to
I've
me.
got 2 more things, and then Chris, you can take the reins back. So, 2 more things about IndyCar. First, I want to talk about this month break that we're about to have. We're about to have an off season in the middle of summer. I want to talk a little bit about that. And then also, there's some silly season things to talk about. And I'm going to start off a silly season because one thing I thought about while talking about young drivers is Indy Lights in 2021. And the guy who's been dominant recently is none other than Andretti Autosport driver Kyle Kirkwood. And why is that important? Because, like I mentioned earlier, with the Lap 1 crash in Mid-Ohio, we're the 2 Andretti Autosport drivers that are currently not in contract, and that would be Ryan Hunter-Reay and James Hinchcliffe. Hinchcliffe this season has been disappointing, to say the least, I will say. I do think there's a lot of instances this season that really aren't his fault. A lot of bad luck. But, I mean, when you're at the top of open wheel racing in America, getting to the end of his contract and then just saying, look, man, I had a lot of bad luck. Can you please give me another contract? That doesn't always work. So I think Hinchcliffe for next season is definitely in jeopardy. And Ryan Hunter-Reay, I think that'll come down to money, obviously, and also performance. Ryan Hunter-Reay, an Indianapolis 500 champion, IndyCar champion, sponsored by DHL since, man, it's been over 10 years now, I think. I think is DHL going to re-up him, or is Michael just going to look for something new? Because the 2 guys in contract, Alexander Rossi and Colton Herta, while Rossi's been having a bit of a slump, it's pretty obvious that he is, very loved by Honda, doing the Baja 1000 once again with Honda. Colton Herta, another Honda poster boy, won a race this season. Just needs just a couple more pieces, and I think Herta's going to be a shoo-in for the championship one of these seasons. So those 2 are locked, obviously. They are in contract, and they are not really in jeopardy. And I bring up Kyle Kirkwood because he's on his way to an Indy Lights championship. And when you get that scholarship money and you have 2 drivers out of contract, I mean, it looks pretty good. Things are looking pretty good for Kyle Kirkwood to take one of the Andretti Autosport seats. And then on the other seat, because there are 2 open, there has actually been some rumors about Romain Grosjean taking that seat. Nothing really, don't really have to look too deep into that. But really, it would make sense because Grosjean's kind of shown interest in doing all of the races. He's doing Gateway this year. That is confirmed now. And I think he definitely has interest in doing the Indianapolis 500. We don't know what the schedule looks like next year, and if Texas will even be back, or what other ovals Grosjean would have to, think about to be becoming a full-time IndyCar driver. But I really think during the Indianapolis GP this year, when Grosjean won that pole and then after the race, when he got a podium and the reception from the crowd for Romain Grosjean, I think that was a moment where everything kind of clicked, and I think Grosjean realized that this is where he wants to be. And like I said, he was the star of the show on Sunday, and him becoming a full-time IndyCar driver. And if you look at that Dale Coyne seat, you think of the guys Dale Coyne's brought to IndyCar, Santino Ferrucci, Alex Palou, and now Romain Grosjean. Those guys have all, Ed Jones, they've all left Dale Coyne Racing to go to bigger teams. It would definitely, that'd be a trend. But the other guy, if it's not Grosjean, a guy that I'm definitely looking at is in the Indy Lights ladder as well with Andretti Autosport is Devlin DiFrancesco. He was supposed to be doing Indy Lights last year, ended up doing Indy Pro 2000, and he hasn't won this season. Nothing really too special from him this year in Lights, but take my word for it. If a car for Andretti Autosport is open and it is not funded, then I definitely know a guy who probably has the funding to run that car next season. He was even talking in the offseason about how if things would have worked out, without the pandemic, obviously, that he would have been hoping to be in an IndyCar this season. So that's definitely a guy, if it comes down to needing a funded ride. I don't know if Michael would let that happen or if he would, because generally I don't know how Michael really deals with just wanting to put a funded car on track. If he knew, it just depends on how Michael feels, how competitive Dave Francesco would be in IndyCar. And then obviously the driver that always circles the silly season rumor mills nowadays is Oliver Askew, another Road to Indy graduate, won the Indianapolis Championship, ran with Aaron McLaren last year, got kind of boned on his deal with Aaron McLaren last season. Everybody knows that story. But had a great showing with Ed Carpenter Racing when Rinus VeeKay was injured. And with just a few hours notice, did pretty solid in Felix Rosenquist's car, his old ride from last year at Detroit. He's been really good in IMSA this year. Everyone knows that he's super talented. And I think everyone in the paddock, all team owners know that, the
You're killing it here, huh?
I'm killing it. I'm stuck.
What are you looking for?
A word.
Dynamic?
That's
I
wow.
don't know. You're on your own, dude.
I don't know, man. Everyone thinks the
Expectation?
I guess, I don't know, that the trajectory, the things
Pathway?
would be.
I don't know.
Man, I really can't. This is
We'll
like
keep it-
Kyle, we're not playing crossword
we're not
puzzles
playing
here.
this. We're not doing it. But anyways, everyone knows that Oliver Askew would do well. Is basically what I'm trying to say. There was a certain word I was looking for. Anyways, everyone knows Oliver Askew's good, and they know that he could do really well for them if given the shot. So it just comes down to funding for Oliver Askew, though. That is the disappointing factor in motorsports, and so that's just Andretti Autosport is pretty much the big talking point in silly season, as they usually are. So I mean, what would that mean for Hinch and Hunter Ray? Who knows? Where they would go? The other thing, was this a discussion last week in Chip Ganassi Racing, or is this?
I don't think so.
Okay, so Chip Ganassi Racing sold their NASCAR program to Trackhouse Racing, owned by Justin Marks. So Chip Ganassi Racing, as of 2022, will no longer have a NASCAR program, which obviously opens up a bunch of funds for Chip Ganassi. And he has publicly stated already that he wants to put Kevin Magnussen in a 5th entry in IndyCar. And Chris and I have talked about this before. Obviously, if that's what Magnussen wants, that's what Chip Ganassi wants. That's cool. They can make it happen. That'll be cool. But as Chris pointed out, I believe, before on this podcast, maybe not on the podcast, might have been in private, but it doesn't matter what Kevin Magnussen wants. Doesn't matter what Chip Ganassi wants. It all matters what Peugeot wants. Because Kevin Magnussen is a driver for Peugeot in the World Endurance Championship. And would they be all right with one of their drivers competing in a full-time scenario in the IndyCar series? I don't know. I don't have the answer for that. Who knows if Kevin Magnussen and Chip Ganassi have the answer to that. So that's going to be the big factor in that deal and whether that happens or not. Other than that, as far as silly season goes, there's Andretti and Ganassi are the two, big talking points so far. Now my next point. Let's not murder any words anymore or lose track of we have a month break in the IndyCar series right now, and it is July 8th, and we don't have another race until the first weekend of August. I believe if you count the Friday on track, it'd be like August 6th or something like that. So we are a month away from the next IndyCar race, and that is disappointing. Obviously, it's not IndyCar's fault, really, because we were supposed to go to Toronto, I think, next weekend. But obviously, with the pandemic in Canada and the borders being closed, that was unable to happen. And I believe Tara said earlier in the chat that IndyCar was going to have to go on a huge marketing raid for the next month. And funny enough, if you look on Twitter, YouTube, everywhere, that's kind of what they've done. I think, kind of what everyone's kind of been noticing for the last week on social media is that IndyCar for once has actually been really, really active on social media. And it's coincidence that we have a month in the gap in the schedule. You know, that's really what they're going to have to do. And we're lucky that the next race is Nashville, I will say, because I think just because it's Nashville and that race has been doing such a good job with marketing, and then it's a new track, they're racing over a friggin' bridge. I think that's going to save the rating. But it is really a shame because if you look at this season, all of the different winners, we discussed all the new winners this season, all the new drivers, all the fantastic things. There's only 2 drivers in the series that have won twice this year. Joseph Newgarden just won his first race of the season, Penske's first race of the season. Elio Castroneves won a record-tying 4th Indianapolis 500. The ratings have been up every week, and now we're sitting here in the July off-season. Depressing, disappointing. It sucks. But what are you going to do?
It's literally summertime, right?
It's the F1 summer break is what I've been thinking of. Remember when I don't know if they still do that, but anyone remember when F1 took 3 weeks off at the end of July?
Yeah, that's still a thing.
Still do that?
Yeah, they still do that. But it's summertime, I mean, this is the time of year where adults take a day or 2 off work, kids are out of school, college kids are out hanging around. This is the time of year to have big events and continuously have events.
It'd be the best time of year to hold auto races, and the kids who aren't in school could go to them, and the parents could take off work to go to them and camp and have a good time. And here we are,
outside.
right when the kids start going back to school, and that's when we're going to start going back IndyCar racing now, apparently.
Well, I'll tell you what, Kyle, the kids might not be able to go to IndyCar races for the next month, but I'll tell you where they can go. They can go visit an IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship race.
They can go to Lime Rock next week and see 17 cars.
Hey, if you're having your rant, I'll have mine, and you can wait 5 minutes for that one. All right, we'll
do... talk about 17 cars at Lime Rock?
I will get to that. But I do want to talk...
3 GTLM cars.
Shh, let me get to that. All right, first of all, we have the WeatherTech 240 at Watkins Glen, which was this past week. Again, I said I wanted to keep the recaps brief. I mean, to be fair, Kyle, you didn't really recap Mid-Ohio.
That wasn't a recap. That was
really
talking about IndyCar, man.
Yeah, you sort of went down the rabbit hole for 37 minutes. Anyways, for my sake here, the WeatherTech 240, I'll keep it very brief. But start of the race, you have contact between the 01 Chip Ganassi Racing Cadillac and the 60 Meyer Shank Acura in turn 1. 60 car goes around, no yellow. I mean, nothing really too insane, just some contact, and the 61, not the 60, the 60 car got sort of shoved out to the back of the field, had to work their way back up through the P2 cars, and the LMP3s for that matter. And meanwhile, the 55 Mazda was able to sort of crawl by everybody from the back of the field up into second place. And they were able to fight with the number 10 Wayne Taylor Racing Acura for a little while. Mazda's been very interesting the past 2 races now, because at the 6 hour, they really didn't have a whole lot of pace. Kyle, I can look... Actually, Joe, we're all here. I'm looking back to that time when we were sitting in the turn 10 grandstands, and you would see just the Mazda falling further and further back every single lap, and you're like, oh, it almost became sort of a laughing point. And then at the end of the race, they had more pace than everybody else with sort of worse tires on the car, which really made no sense. Same sort of deal at the 240, where at the beginning of the race, they qualified towards the back. In fact, I think they qualified second to last, only in front of the number 5 car. In fact, they might have been last. I can't remember quite too well, but it certainly was the back row. And after first turn, they're up into second place, and they were really able to fight for the lead for a while. Later on into the race, about an hour and 40 minutes to go, we had a red flag due to some rain on the track, some rain and lightning in the area. Wasn't really, I don't really know if it was the lightning or the dense fog that caused the red flag. Although I'm sort of leaning towards the fog because I think that's what officially brought it out. Maybe they extended the red flag because of the lightning in the area. So that was pretty much nearly a 1 hour red flag period. Got restarted with about 50, 45-ish minutes to go in the race. And from there on in, it was basically just a race between the Cadillacs. Pulled up the wrong thing. The 31 Cadillac, the Whelen Engineering Action Express, was able to pull away from the 55 car on the restart. And it really just became a 2-horse race between the 31 and the 10, just like the 6 hour was sort of a 2-horse race at the very end. 31 was able to hold off the 10 car and get their first win of the season, which I don't know if you two have noticed, but now this means every full-time DPI entrant has won a race this season. The only exception overall would be the 48 Ally Action Express car. They'll have a shot at that at Petit Le Mans for the season finale, and if they
Chris,
can pull that off, yes.
Shank hasn't won yet.
Oh, you're right.
You just
I
did that.
completely forgot about
really
that.
Did that.
I completely forgot about Shank. I'm
Why?
sorry.
You,
I'm sorry.
you really, you went and
Right.
boofed us. You boofed us.
You did me dirty like that.
You are
Can't believe
completely
this.
Anyway, yes.
Unbelievable.
Ignore what I said. Shank still hasn't won a race this season, but they have been looking relatively strong, and they were starting on the front row for another race. So, actually, did they start on the front row? No, I'm second guessing myself again. Yes, they did start on the front row. Started second in this past race. So, if we can get them to get a win, then it will be every full-time entrant in the class that will have won the DPI category this season, and then we will just be waiting on the 48 car, which would be basically Petit Le Mans or bust. Anyway, quickly going over the results from the race. Again, as I said, 31 Whelen Engineering Action Express Cadillac of Felipe Nasr and Pippo Durrani won overall in the DPI category, followed by the 01 Chip Ganassi Racing Cadillac and the 10 Konica Minolta Wayne Taylor Racing Acura. LMP2 was the number 52 PR1 Matthias and Motorsports Orica, Ben Keating and Mikael Jensen. The 74 Riley Motorsports Ligier led their teammate to a 1-2 with Gar Robinson and Felipe Fraga taking the outright win in that class. And in GTLM, another Corvette 1-2. Going to talk about GTLM a little bit more in a second when it comes to the next race, with the 3 car finishing above the number 4 car. A little bit of a close battle at the end of that race as well, but the 3 car did have the pace to hold off their teammate. So another win up for Antonio Garcia and Jordan Taylor, really on a winning streak at this point. In GTD, finally, another 1-2 actually, between the 2 Vassar-Sullivan Lexuses, with the 14 car of Aaron Tielitz and Jack Hawksworth holding off the 12 car of Frankie Montecalvo and Zach Veach. And in third place, it was the Heart of Racing Aston Martin, which Heart of Racing actually has been a team that's been quietly up front for a lot of the races in GTD this year and still well in the championship hunt for that class. Now, speaking of championship, looking at the points right now across all 5 classes, it is the number 10 Wayne Taylor Racing Acura that holds the championship lead, still at 2,060 points over the 55 Mazda at 1987, and the 31 Action Express Cadillac in third with 1954. Trying to scroll down to a means that's going to make this easier to read. Here we go. Okay, so in LMP2, it is the 52 PR1 Matthias and Motorsports Orica at 1,087 points over the number 11 Win Autosport Orica at 1,052 points. In LMP3, which, by the way, I could probably be doing this a better way, but I am scrolling through the 15-page sort of sheet to read all the championship standings, and get lost in it a couple times. It is the 74 Riley Motorsports Ligier at 1468 points over the 54 Core Autosport Ligier at 1,372. And yes, first of all, I do want to say the new point system that we have this year, where we're up into the thousands, sort of similar to what Supercars is like, is actually harder to follow. When you have bigger numbers like that, it's really hard for my small brain to compress that and sort of do the calculations in my head as to how big the gaps really are. So if you're able to follow along while you're listening, props to you. But you can also find the championship standings on their website if you want to look at it on your own time. GTLM, unsurprisingly, the number 3 Corvette leads over the number 4 at 1,467 points versus 1,311. And finally, in the GTD class, it is the number 96 Turner Motorsport BMW, still with 1,296 points over the 23 Heart of Racing Aston Martin at 1,235. So only about a 61-point swing, points difference in that class, which really, when you're talking about 1,300 points nearly, isn't actually as much as it seems. And next race will be Lime Rock Park, a GT-only race, which will be happening next Saturday. I've been going to that race since 2008, and I think 2008 by far is the best year that I went to that race, when you had the Audi R10s and the RS Spyders and the Acura ARXs. Because, you can, prototypes don't work at Lime Rock, obviously. At least that's what IMSA will tell you nowadays. And this is where I want to vent my frustrations at the fact that we still have GT-only races in IMSA, despite the fact that the GTLM class this year has 3 cars full season, with both Corvettes and the WeatherTech Racing Porsche. Now listen, it just, for me, and for a lot of other people I know as well, isn't working anymore. I think these GT-only races really are hurting the sport more than they're helping anything. And I'm sort of sick of the excuse that we can't race prototypes at Lime Rock and VIR. I've heard many reasons over the years as to why we can't race the prototypes at those tracks. From, the first thing I heard was there's just not enough space in the pit lane. And then I heard the track is too fast for the cars. And then I heard it's too hard to pass, or for the prototypes to pass to those tracks. But we've seen in the past with the American Le Mans Series, and Cran-Dam for that matter, that prototypes have raced at VIR and at Lime Rock Park with, I don't think that many problems. I'm not a driver, never been a driver, so I couldn't comment on previous experiences there. But to me, there was nothing really that stood out as to what made that race difficult to host with prototypes. And I don't think you need to have all 5 classes at a track like Lime Rock. I certainly don't think it's accommodating enough to have all 5 classes of cars, especially with the run-ins you could have between the LMP3 cars and the GT Le Mans cars, with the already pretty limited amount of passing opportunities at that track. But for next weekend, when your headline event has 17 cars, to me, it's not doing it anymore. And I'm hoping, and I hope this every year, I've hoped this every single season since 2015, that IMSA would bring the prototypes back to both VIR and Lime Rock, even if it's only the DPI category. And it hasn't happened. So, IMSA's State of the Series usually happens around the Road America weekend in the end of the month. And I'll have my fingers crossed, as I do every single year, that they'll change their minds. They'll realize that, especially now, now more than ever, because the issue is we have GTD Pro coming next year. And I was talking to my dad about this today. We have GTD Pro coming, but I actually don't know how much interest they're going to pull with that class right now. You'll talk about, are they going to be able to get factory Porsches back? Well, factory Porsches are going to LMDH, and that's all we know right now with Penske. So unless you're running 2 factory efforts in the same championship, similar to what they were doing, I guess, in the World Endurance Championship a few years back with the LMP1 car and the GTE Pro program. Frankly, I don't see that happening. But then you can talk about we lost BMW as a full-time entrant. Well, they're going over to LMDH. And I certainly have heard that they have interest in running in GTD Pro, but I don't know how strong the effort would look for that class down the road. And when the focus is certainly shifting for prototypes right now in IMSA more than the World Endurance Championship, where you have a lot of manufacturers who seem to be prioritizing prototype racing, because I think right now for the fans, it's more exciting. I think it's generating more publicity right now. GTE had its heyday, I think, when you had the Ford GT program. We had Risi running with their Ferrari back in 2016, almost full-time. In fact, it might have still been full-time in 2016. Certainly 2015, though. We had BMW running full-time, Porsche running full-time, and Corvette running full-time. I mean, ever since that last race at Lime Rock that I went to in 2019, they didn't host it in 2020. In 2019, for the overall win, mind you, we had Corvette, Ford, Porsche, and BMW. That's 4 manufacturers. And this year it's down to 2, and Porsche only has 1 car in the hands of a privateer entry that so far this season hasn't really been able to generate as much success as Corvette, with the exception of Sebring, which was kind of a fluke.
You say they literally won Sebring.
Yes, they won Sebring, but you have to look at what happened at the end of that race.
They literally still won Sebring.
Okay, I'm not going to discredit that, but yeah, that's I don't want to get too hostile about that, but it certainly is a frustration, because over the years at Lime Rock, you can sort of see the attendance go down. And I said earlier, in a group chat that we're in, that if I was Lime Rock just got sold to a new management group. Skip Barber is still a partial owner of the track, but it's really sort of a consortium of different owners, including Parker Kligerman's one of the owners of the track now. Lime Rock, since 2008, has renovated the track twice. They did it in 2008, where they repaved the entire track, and they did a whole lot of improvements to the actual spectator areas. And then in 2015, 2016, they did their Project 60, where they did even more renovations to the actual spectator areas of the track. I mean, you're talking about a small regional sort of, this, what I'm trying to say is this isn't some F1 grade 1 or FIA grade 1 venue, that has just hundreds of millions of dollars at their disposal. It's really sort of an old American road course that's been doing their part to renovate the track, make it very fan accessible, and it still is up there as one of my favorite tracks that I've visited, because of how much effort they actually put into making it a good fan experience. I would be livid if I put in that much money into renovations to really have it all go to nothing, because their premier event for the year is IMSA, and it still is, even with 17 cars. But you have seen the interest in that race die down over the past 10 years or so, because it's not generating as many storylines as it used to, unfortunately. And with the direction that GTE racing is going, I guess GT racing and IMSA in general, it's hard to look at it and say it's in a bad shape. I mean, I think the future for IMSA with GTD Pro and GTD is strong, and we still have 14 GTD cars racing at Lime Rock next weekend, which is certainly no shortage. But when your headline is 17 cars, you need to do better than that. And again, my fingers are crossed for the state of the series that they're going to change their minds finally on that. I'm very cautiously optimistic on that. I don't really have high expectations, but when they go through with that event, we can recap any changes that they make and go from there.
IMSA's been very confusing the entire time since the merger of Grand Am and ALMS, because for the longest time, you're close to Lime Rock, I'm close to Mid-Ohio. So for the longest time, we didn't have Mid-Ohio on the IMSA calendar. A track that was on the ALMS calendar and the Grand Am calendar was left out until 2017. From 20, what was the first year of the merger? 2014.
2014, yeah.
2014 to 17, we didn't have Mid Ohio on the calendar, a track that was in both series. And if I'm VIR or Lime Rock, I feel very screwed. It's just hard to understand. I mean, sure, the cars nowadays are going just as fast as the RS Spider. Go look at the
They're actually
qualifying
going slightly slower.
Yeah, go look at the qualifying times at every track we go to, and look at qualifying times in 2008. I believe they were faster at Sebring. We were faster than Sebring today than the 2008, but it is so close. It is so close, and to say we can't go to Lime Rock because they're too fast, and VIR is the one I understand. Like, there's no reason for prototypes to not be able to go to there. But yeah, I'd feel very screwed if I was those tracks. If you're gonna put all that effort into hosting a race and going to different tracks, why not take all the classes? And I kind of understand LMP2 and LMP3 and deciding what those classes go to. Even GTLM, since there's only limited manufacturers, a manufacturer and a Cooper McNeil. I would, with a shorter class, kind of let them pick, the type of budget and what amount of races they want to go to. But, especially like in a year when we lost Motorsport because of the pandemic, and instead we decided to stay in Watkins Glen and race on a Friday instead of just telling the prototype teams so we can, give them the option to go to VIR or Lime Rock. I don't understand that either. That makes no sense. We did 2 races at Road Atlanta last year. The VIR just kind of sat,
Like, and 2 at Daytona last year as well.
It doesn't make sense. And none of it makes sense. I understand last year was a bit different.
Yeah, last year I'll give him an exception because booking any track during the heat of the pandemic last year was, it wasn't a walk in the park. So I'll give him that one. But
I guess they did go for the tracks where they could have fans. But, diversity in the schedule is important. Going to Watkins Glen on a Friday to me didn't make any sense.
Well, here's what I want to say as a quick aside. I could have saved this for a future episode, but it really fits in here. The other day, as I was still thinking about the announcement of the 9X8 into the hypercar category and how substantial it could be to bring new fans into the series. This applies to both IMSA and the World Endurance Championship, but actually more for IMSA right now. When you have the amount of potential that you have to pull in new fans into the sport, people are going to look at manufacturers. That's what people care about for sports car racing. Certainly, that's what draws the most attention. And you have no shortage of that whatsoever right now across LMDH. So you have a huge amount of potential, but your biggest hurdle is confusion. And what I mean by that is if you have a series that is, there's a lot of storylines coming out of it and there's a lot to focus on, but there's almost a little bit too much to focus on to the point where for the average racing fan, it's a little bit too much to digest. That can be a real turnoff for a lot of people. And I've seen this increasingly at IMSA over the past couple of seasons. Typically we wouldn't really do that many races in IMSA where you didn't have every class. Even back when we had the prototype challenge class, there were a couple of exceptions. If I want to let's just take the 2016 season, for example. Lime Rock that year had the prototype challenge class in 2016, and Laguna Seca is the one I was looking for. Laguna Seca used to split up their prototype and GT races because of the amount of space they had in the pit lane. So you did have a couple of cases there where you didn't have every class on track, and of course VIR was still the GT only race. But overall, there wasn't too much to get confused by. Nowadays, and I like to consider myself a pretty advanced fan of IMSA, meaning I try to pay attention to it more than the average person would.
Wow.
And it's getting a little bit confusing for me to even pay attention to some of the things because we have different championships now. You know, we used to have the endurance championship, which was the 4 endurance races, and if you didn't really want to focus on that, you didn't really have to. Sort of just sat there as an aside. Got talked about a little bit in the broadcast, but now we have the Sprint Cup as well, which is sort of what they use to incentivize more entries into the non-endurance races. I know a couple of seasons ago, 2019, we had the forgetting the team now, the McLaren that came in though. I don't know why the team name slipped away from me. But we had the McLaren come in as a Sprint Cup entry, and you know, it worked for its purpose, but I feel like they got a little bit too comfortable with the idea of sort of making the series more confusing than it had to be, especially now where you can point at any race on the schedule and say, well, okay, so here's the thing is this race exists, but it doesn't exist for GTLM points. You know, when we had Detroit, GTLM, the Corvettes were there, but it wasn't a GTLM points paying race. In fact, the only reason the Corvettes showed up is because they could probably get some nice photos of the cars with the GM building in the background. Frankly, that's probably the only reason why they actually showed up at that race. They finished 1-2, obviously, and it meant absolutely nothing to them in the championship. So for them to be sort of making those decisions, I think they need to go back on a lot of them and make the series easier to follow, because right now you have a bunch of different races where there's no LMP3 class. You have a bunch of races where you know, this counts for some series, but it doesn't count for some. I think even Daytona, if I'm not mistaken, Daytona, I don't believe counted for LMP2 points, I want to say, this year. I could be wrong on that, but I'm at least 50% confident that I'm right. It was one of the classes at Daytona that didn't count for points. And it was sort of like why? You know, it's really difficult to follow. And if you get comfortable with those ideas, and I know in sports car racing more than any other, you have to be a good balance of pleasing the fans and pleasing your manufacturers and the drivers, because in sports car racing, it's really the drivers that are paying for this series. At least they have a large hand in it, which is how we get into the argument of paid drivers and amateur classes in sports car racing. But there's certainly a lot of work to be done there, and I'm hoping that, again, that they reverse some of those decisions rather than add more confusion to future seasons, because you have a lot of potential with the new LMDH formula and all of these manufacturers coming in, and it's going to be very difficult to explain to these new people coming in exactly how your series works. And if they don't know how your series works, they're not going to be able to be a proper fan of it. So that's just a little aside there. It's going to have to be, I think, their number one priority, though, going into the next 2 or 3 seasons, is how do we make this series easier to follow? Because if you have all of that potential and you don't really capitalize on it to the best of your ability, that in itself, I think, is a failure. Anyway, I think that's all I have on that note. I don't know if either of you had anything to add on to that. I'll give you a second now if you did. But apart from that, the one last thing I wanted to go over, because I didn't remember to do it earlier in the episode, is the season finale World Endurance Championship race this year. I guess the last 2 races of the season is what I'm really talking about. We will have a double header now at Bahrain due to the sort of fallout of the WEC race at Fuji due to the ongoing pandemic in Japan. Go figure, where we host in the Olympics in a week. But we can't host the WEC race at Fuji, so we have a doubleheader at Bahrain, which will be 2 weeks in a row, which is actually a little bit nice, because it's extremely rare that we'll get back-to-back WEC races like that. In fact, I don't know if it's ever happened. Amarok Starwind, hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly there, just said, I have a question. It's about engines. Go ahead and leave that, and I'll try to get to that real quick. But Joe and Kyle, I'm going to give this to you guys real quick if you had any sort of wrap-up thoughts on what I was talking about before we answer that one question and then wrap up the episode.
I don't really have anything else to add. It is way too confusing, and yeah, it really shouldn't be.
Well, I think the problem initially even is that IMSA racing, sports car racing in general, outside of a couple big events, doesn't have a huge draw on a national level in the first place, I think, and that's not something they can't fix, but it's something that we've kind of dealt with in our early childhood, not as much early childhoods, but like for the three of us up here, sort of like the developmental teenage into our early 20s years, it's kind of been difficult to follow if you're not a real in-depth race fan in the first place. But at the same time, I think there's a lot more draw on the side of people who aren't diehard racing fans to sports cars too. Maybe even more than a NASCAR or an Indy car, just because of the influence of manufacturers in the sport. The big thing I think with what you've said is they still focus on putting a good weekend together for the people who show up at the racetrack, which is really what the manufacturers look for when they bring their tents and their show cars and they give out free koozies and stuff like that. Um, if you're following IMSA for a racing fan, I feel like even though you're right that this endurance series, sprint series, full time series. They'll start running a series for cars that drive the track backwards or something. You know, they could do all of that, but real diehard racing fans will still weave through it. I agree it's not ideal, but at the same time, if you look at all the other things that they still do and where they might focus elsewise, I feel like for somebody who maybe isn't as big of a sports car racing fan, it would be something they'd notice. You know, somebody who's big into IndyCar or NASCAR but doesn't really know sports car racing would look at that and go, "What the heck is going on?" But a casual person, a regular schmuckatelli who shows up at the racetrack, isn't going to know any of that in the first place. They're going to, the they're going to go get the handouts and they're going to go hear the loud cars and they're going to be excited, stuff like that. So I agree, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of other things that they look at when they host these races that don't, while it's not great for us, maybe it doesn't really service a lot of the other people who show up, a lot of the casual guys who show up, and then obviously people who follow it really intently. But at the same time, another really great part of that is maybe they'll offer some sort of monetary payment for winning that championship, which you talk about in racing. Like, racing is a money guzzling sport. Really, nobody ever really makes a lot of money off of motorsports anymore. So putting a little bit extra money up, I think that's something worthwhile. And for that, I appreciate the sprint series. You just dish out a little bit more to help those teams get together cars that they can bring to more races. I think that's a really important part of it.
Right. I mean, I think you covered a lot of the bases there. Sort of just touching off what I was saying. And to answer that question, we actually sort of got a fun question, which is fine. I'm all for ending the episode on a fun question. But he just asked if you, for whatever reason, needed to rebuild your car's engine from scratch. I thought this was sort of like a racing, me speaking on behalf of a racing team here. But it's not. Needed to rebuild your car's engine from scratch. You didn't have enough metal to make anything useful. What materials do you try to use instead? I would take Kyle's IndyCar diecast because he has no shortage of those. I would melt them down. You got enough diecast metal there, you can build 50 engines. And that's what I would do.
But that's metal.
Well, okay. Well, see, he said if I didn't have enough metal to make anything useful, but I got no shortage of metal if I go to Kyle's house and steal some of those die casts off the wall.
You could do what I don't remember his first name. Whatever Mr. Koenigsegg did, and whatever Mr. Koenigsegg's first name is, you could
Oh,
do what he
Christian
did.
von Koenigsegg?
Yeah, you could do whatever he did, and you could build one out of carbon fiber. I don't know why you would have access to carbon fiber, but not metal, but you could do that.
Well, you know what I would love to do, Joe, is I would love to make an engine housing completely out of wood, right? So you have like the cylinder, because you have combustion, right? So eventually that wood's gonna like burn. So you're gonna have an engine that might, I don't know if this would work at all, but you know, maybe it'll work for a couple seconds, maybe it'll work for a couple of minutes, but eventually it's just gonna catch on fire. And I think that's
You know
a nice
what else?
element of.
Another thing you could do is you could install like a big tank of water on top of it too, so that when your wooden engine inevitably goes up in flames, you'll get a residual steam engine type setup where
Ah,
this you could create some steam within like a water tank, but then you could also do that. So like kind of be like it would objectively by definition that would be a hybrid because it would be two different forms of energy propulsion. So I don't know. I mean, we could dial up WEC and maybe apply that. You know, that's
we're bringing the steam engine back to Le Mans.
yeah.
I would make it like an engine out of Legos, and I'd work it to a point to where you have like a handle, and that's how you power their
Oh, they
engine.
have those. Like, hey, you ever have one of
Yeah.
those like Lego Technic sets
Yeah,
where
that's
it's like
exactly.
it has the
Yeah.
little like tiny plastic cylinders that actually move up and
man.
down in the right.
Yeah,
Oh,
those are fun.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's a guy who made a long time ago. I feel like I've seen that somebody built a fully operational engine out of Legos before. I mean, a real engine. I think that's happened. I don't know how on earth they pulled it off, but I feel like I've seen that before.
I mean that's sort of similar to the wood though, because then you're just doing combustion inside plastic, and that plastic's gonna melt soon. So
I wonder if maybe in the long run, maybe someday somebody will figure out a polymer of plastic that can withstand enough heat like that we actually could make engines out of plastic. That would be pretty cool.
you know it probably exists honestly. There's just a question
Probably
of
right.
how easy it is to manufacture, I guess, because I don't think any manufacturers right now are really interested in making plastic engine blocks anyways.
Mm.
Why wouldn't they be?
I don't know. Keep a conservative approach.
I'm sticking with the wooden engine and the steam engine on top of it. That's my game.
I'm liking that as well. Anyway, almost an hour and 45 minutes into this episode. I think it's a good time to call it a wrap. I'd like to thank Joe for coming on again. I don't have his channel linked. What a shame. Let me see if I can do that real quick here while I speed run this outro. But if you want to listen to the podcast on an audio platform, Google Podcasts, Google Podcasts is still a thing. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all those platforms are your friend. You can find us on there. And hopefully we will be back next week, as I say every time, to do a Tuesday episode to recap the... I just realized I didn't recap Formula One this episode when I wanted to, but we'll have to do that next time, I guess. Trying to think if there's anything going on for races this weekend, but I'm drawing a blank. Anyway, we'll be recapping news and all that stuff next week. For now, I'm going to say take care. See you next week, hopefully.